All right. You are watching and listening to the Salty Witches podcast.
Hello, everyone.
And we are back together. I think it's been a minute since we have done a podcast together.
It's been a few weeks. We missed last week.
Last week was Shadowfest.
Last week was Shadowfest, Samhain, Halloween, whatever you call it. And we also, one of the reasons that we were not able to get an episode out last week, which is, fine. Nobody's mad about it, right? Or maybe you're mad about it, but we had shit to do.
Your grief is your own if you're mad about it.
No, we were actually guests on Jack's podcast, right? We did an interview with another podcaster, another occultist network friend of ours. Oh God,
colleague.
I'm fumbling with words right now. Yes, colleague certainly. But also a friend, I think. What is the name of their podcast? We should have been prepared. Oh God, it just my brain just.
It'll be in the description.
We always say that we're going to put it in the description, and then we never do. So we need to actually do that this time.
I'll do it. I'll take care.
Sorry, I'm stripping down because it's very warm in here. You're putting off a lot of heat. You're putting off a lot of heat. I just wanted to get my man boobs to jiggle on camera. Okay, anyway. All right, so I'm going to refer to notes here because we have a few different things to talk about today. We had one of our listeners contact us in recent weeks and wanted to know if we could actually do an episode where we discussed palmistry.
Bitch, why am I on this episode of the podcast? I don't know shit about palmistry.
Well, you don't, but I figured that would actually be kind of a good thing because I'm a palm reader. And then I can talk about this, and then as maybe questions, or as maybe I'm talking about things and they're kind of maybe they're just I'm not sure what that means. Mm-hmm. Then you can interrupt and say, "What does that mean, Mike?"
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Be a helper for once.
I always help.
Anyway, no, I did want to say though, it's gonna be. I was thinking about this, and it's gonna be a little bit of a challenge, to be honest, to discuss palm reading on the podcast because we're not able to really give you visuals. I can hold my hand up close to the camera. But that's also really not going to give me a chance to really, I think, or enable me to really clearly, in detail, to explain in a way that is going to help you to realize oh, this is what he's talking about, right? So I'm going to try to do my best tonight as we talk about this. I thought that a really good place to start with this would really be just to kind of talk about the different anatomical components of the hand that we work with when we read, and some of these you are also familiar with.
A little bit, yeah.
You've tried to take the palmistry class that I teach. I think the last 2 times that I've taught it, and you've been unable to do that because you and I just have so much shit that we do here.
I've been working the shop.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I, the thing is I already do everything except palmistry and astrology at this point.
Oh, so you're letting me have this?
Well, no, I'm not letting you have this. You've done this for a very long time. I mean, you grew up reading palms, right?
I was reading palms, or I should clarify, I was learning to read palms. You were still a baby when I had just started to learn to read palms.
Goo gaga, bitch.
Because I'm so much older than you.
So much older.
There's like a 30-year age difference. It feels like it sometimes because I'm an old fart.
You're 62.
Yes. Anyway, so when you go in to get a palm reading, the first thing that people really kind of want to pay attention to, and when you meet with a palm reader, okay, they should really take a look at both of your hands. Okay, now in discussing some of what we're going to share tonight, I want to make it very clear that there's no one way to read palms. There are lots of ways to read palms, and I've actually been called out on a number of occasions on social media where I've gone out and I've tried to share some information on palmistry, and someone, maybe in a different culture, different area of the world, who reads palmistry differently, has tried to pick a fight or argue with me. And in those situations, all I can really do is just kind of remind people that there's no one way to read palm.
It's always so funny when people do that. It's just when you have someone sit down and you're reading tarot cards and they're like, well, that's not the traditional meaning of that card. And it's well, that's great. That's what it means right now. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. I just love it when you do. You sit down and you're reading the cards. And they're like, well, I'm also a bit of a tarot card reader. And for me, this card says... And I always just want to smack those people.
Usually I just tell them, oh, okay, well, you go ahead and read for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Why are you here if you read cards?
Still take your money.
Read your own fucking cards, yeah. Right? Anyway, but when you sit down, you want to have them look at both of your hands, okay? And the reason for that, both, all of your hands,
all of them.
The reason for that is that your dominant hand, the one that you write with, okay, for me as a right-handed person, okay, and I realize the screen might be mirrored, I'm not sure. As a right-handed person, if I were to sit down and be, like, say, like if I'm reading my own palm, which I don't do, but if I were, I would read my right hand as a measure or an indication of what is most likely to be happening in the years ahead of my life, based off of the conscious decisions and the patterns of behavior that I have set into motion through my decisions and my actions in just my day-to-day life. Okay. The offhand, my passive hand, my left hand, I would look to this one for the more abstract, the more spiritual influences in my life, maybe the things that even I am not consciously aware of, or things that would not seem to have immediate connection to the decisions and the actions that I'm taking day to day in my life, right? So your offhand, your passive hand is going to have a lot to do with like fate, destiny, if you believe in these kinds of things, and I do not. And again, just like spiritual influences, right? You can also refer to your passive hand a lot for past life associations, if you're someone who incorporates past life information into a palm reading. Okay, and you should, because there's a lot of information there. Okay, so I wanted to talk about that a little bit. When you go in and you first have them look at your hand, right? The next thing that they're probably going to do is they're going to be looking at your major lines, and everyone will have three major. Well, hold on. Most people, like 90% of people, will have three distinct major lines. That is your lifeline, which is the general measure of the flow and the length of your life.
Is this the lifeline?
Your lifeline is the one that wraps around your thumb, right here.
I did it. I learned
like
something.
Right? I shouldn't say it doesn't wrap around your thumb. What it does is it wraps around your mount of Venus. This area, this padded area, the mount or the base of your thumb, okay, is the mount of Venus. Okay, and so your lifeline runs from here, kind of between your index and your thumb, right? Runs in and down, and usually will kind of curve back up around. You can kind of see mine does right here. I've got this little bit of a crossroads thing happening here with a Saturn line. We'll talk about that one in a minute. Okay, but your lifeline is going to be the general measure of your life, and to be honest, actually can be interpreted as an indication of longevity, depending on how long your line is and what the end of the line looks like.
That if you want to see this, you need to go over to YouTube, because the people who listen to this via Spotify are not going to be seeing this. So if you want to see this...
That's true. For our Spotify listeners, yes, I'm holding my hand up to the camera right now. But what I'm going to actually tell you, if you were like, I don't want to get into YouTube, although, why not? YouTube's kind of fun, right? But if you're like, I just want to kind of do this, on my headphones, I don't want to have to deal with a computer or a TV right now, then, the next time you have a minute, like maybe just Google like palmistry or palmistry hand diagram, right? And you can see where all of these lines are, okay? Very easy. All that information is out there, okay? So your lifeline will be usually where we want to look first. The other interesting thing about your lifeline is that it gives you, because of its ability to kind of measure the general flow of your life, in parallel to the other lines that form on your palm. And this takes skill to be able to do this. This is why you need to go to someone when you're getting a palm reading that has not only the intuitive and spiritual knowledge and connection to that work, but someone who also understands anatomy as it would relate to your hand and the meridians, the energetic meridians that run through your palm. Okay, the people need to have knowledge of both of those things, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the different pools of knowledge that really kind of create palmistry as a form of divination and spiritual work. Okay, so we'll talk about that later. Okay, but your lifeline also, in parallel to the other lines and the way that it runs through the palm with those other lines, can also give you an indication and is read as a sign of when things are likely to occur in your life as it would relate to career changes, educational plans, other big processes of transition, relationships, all of that stuff is going to be read in conjunction with the other major line that focuses specifically on those aspects of life and your lifeline. So from your lifeline, typically as I'm reading a palm, from there I move to the headline. And I do that mainly because the headline on the average palm actually begins in the same point that your lifeline does. You can see my lifeline begins here. And again, my lifeline is the one, if you're able to see this really clearly. This is where I was like, I'm going to fumble this because people need visual aids for this. Okay, but you're going to run down. All right, that's my lifeline. Okay. Your headline, and why I usually go right to the headline next, is that your headline begins typically, for most people, at the same point that your lifeline does. And it'll share a common line usually. And what you'll probably see happening is you'll get these little, like, what they call like chains or islands that kind of form as these two lines kind of like weave and kind of bump into each other. But we really do kind of see this as just one common line or a shared line for a moment. Usually this is going to last up to, say, maybe like your mid-20s, maybe early 30s on the average palm. From there, we then see your palm. Oh, we're getting dark. We then see your palm move, or your line, excuse me, your headline move. It splits. It splinters away from your lifeline and then kind of runs. You can see mine right here. It runs kind of over like this, right? Your headline is going to be a measure of your ambition, your worldly goals, the things that you do as it might relate to education, the plans and goals that you have as it might relate to your work. All of these things are in essence going to be kind of shown or indicated through headline energy and movement and anatomy as it moves through your palm. Headline is another interesting one to focus on in a palm reading because most of us tend to be very ambitious. We live in a world right now that really encourages a lot of like drive, planning, organization, these kinds of things, right? No, not you, not at all.
No, I'm agreeing.
Oh, okay. Right.
You mentioned islands earlier.
Yes.
So are islands the little like?
So as you look to your lines on your palm, you'll have what looks
like the line separates but then comes back together.
So this is kind of the distinction. The distinction, really, what it comes down to it is that an island is when you see one line get to a point where it's almost like the one line splits into two, and then there's like a little kind of a gap between those two tiny lines, and then eventually those two tiny lines weave back together into the initial or the original line into one line. Okay, yeah, you've got it right there. Yep. Okay, so what happens with an island is something that happens. It's a smaller line formation that originates from one line. Chains, which can look like islands, only there are usually a lot of them like in connection, so it looks like the links of a chain. Okay, chains usually are what happen when you see two lines kind of interact with each other, or sometimes they can be originating from one line, but if that's the case, then that's typically a sign of a lot of rapid change and fluctuation in that person's life around whatever that line is indicating, right? Whatever that line rules. Everyone will have both islands and chains on their palm. If you don't have any islands or chains in your life, that's
really boring.
Kind of unfortunate. Yes, that means you're a very boring person. You don't really have a whole lot going on. And you need to be more proactive about facilitating change in your life. All right?
All right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry about that. We had a visitor come into the shop. We're as usual, we're recording around our other responsibilities here at the store, because if we don't do this, we won't ever be able to get you new episodes.
Technical difficulties have been resolved.
Yes. So chains and islands are common things.
Yes.
And where you see one on your lifeline, that's usually an indication, that island I should specify, that's usually an indication of a phase, a period of time. Sorry, making sure that we're not going to have another interruption. Where you kind of have found your place. That's kind of what an island indicates, is that for at least a period of time, for the duration of time that island can be measured as like actual chronological time in your life, it's a sign that you've kind of found a place. You've been able to create general life circumstances that are working for you. There isn't really a need to change or to really make a lot different at that point. And now, because life is what it is, and because we are the kinds of creatures that we are, not only physically but spiritually, we can't just stay in that kind of state forever, right? Like, we need to continue to grow. If we get too comfortable, we stay in place for too long, we stagnate, right? So that's one of the reasons why islands will always weave back together. Okay. Is because sooner or later there's a moment where you're like, you got to make some change, you got to get moving again, because you've been here too long, right?
So islands are pauses.
They're not pauses because shit's still happening, but there's not overall like a lot of change in that aspect of your life. These are like situations where you find a new job. Like if an island were to appear on your headline, and they do, they appear on every line. If an island were to appear on your headline at a particular point, that would be an indication that you've kind of have found a position or a job that's like really working for you. So, and then when that island kind of weaves back together into one line, that is usually seen as an indication of like, oh, you might now lose that job, or it might now be time for you to make another change.
Okay, so like I have these two islands here that happen when we split, and that's probably in my like mid-20s.
No.
Early 30s?
No, you're probably like right here, you're probably in like kind of like mid to late 30s right here.
Okay.
And that's another one of the things that's an example in what Austin was just showing me. When we look at lifeline, the length of your lifeline and how it can be a measure of longevity, okay? Your lifeline, depending on where those small things appear, okay, that's going to be an indication of the age approximately that you're going to be when that occurs, right? Whether it be here, whether it be on one of your other major lines, okay? Okay, so headline, again, your careers, your ambition, learning, those goals, those kinds of things, at least as it relates to what you are accomplishing in the material, the physical world around you, okay? Your next major line is your heart line, okay? And your heart line right here, we run from just below the Mount of Mercury, which is below your little finger, and it runs in and across. And ideally, there's no such thing as normal when it comes to palms because everybody's palm is different. But ideally, this line will run up and it will come to an end between your index and your middle finger. Okay, that's kind of seen as an ideal formation or an ideal termination for this line. Okay, your heart line, okay, is aptly named because this measures your emotional connections to the world, to other people around you. This is going to be a good indication or a sign. The activity that you see here will be a good indication of relationship activity that you may have. Very close friendships, the really deep, meaningful connections, the personal connections in your life are all really going to have some sort of record on your heart line.
So
okay? You can also read the heart line as an indication of heart health. You actually look at like the health of your heart and your circulatory system. A lot of those details can also pop up on this line. But I would never read just one line as an indication of health. If you're looking at issues around physical health or determining things around physical health, you really do have to kind of scan the whole hand. Okay? And even then, make sure that person still goes and sees a doctor because anybody that is making medical decisions based off of the information that they're getting from a palm reader or a psychic alone, yeah, that person is asking for trouble.
Yeah, also super unethical.
Yeah,
for the practitioner.
Yeah, if you're doing a palm reading, you're doing a reading for somebody, and you're giving them advice on health or legal issues, anything like that, where you know that there is another established professional person that can actually be giving them information relevant to that thing, that aspect of their life, they need to be consulting with those people as well.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, that is best ethical practice for all of us. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So those are your three major lines. And between those three lines, you're going to really get the bulk of what you probably need as it would relate to general life direction, the decisions that you make, your plans, your relationships, all of those things. Okay. Now, in addition to the three major lines that most people will have, okay, you'll have additional, or what they call like minor lines. They're not like, the big three, right? But they still are significant as they appear on the palm. The three major lines the three minor lines are a little bit tricky, okay, because everybody doesn't have these. Okay, these are not as common. You will see them absolutely on most everyone's palm, but everybody isn't going to have, is not guaranteed to have all of the minor lines. Okay, so what we see happening with minor line activity, okay, and this is going to be the first thing that comes up that kind of makes it clear that there are different ways of reading the palm, and we have a lot of different names and terminology for some of the things that show up on a palm. Okay, the first one that I like to talk about is a Saturn line. In some traditions of palm reading, this is also referred to as a fate line or a stomach line. And it begins basically right here, kind of at the base where your palm meets your wrist. And it will sometimes zigzag just a little bit. You can kind of see that mine does. It zigzags just a little bit. But typically, it's going to begin somewhere around here. It's going to move up through the center of your palm. And it runs up ideally, and we usually end kind of like right about here, below your middle finger. And the reason that they call this a Saturn line, at least in the tradition that I utilize, is that your middle finger, this is Saturn's influence in your life. So it points to Saturn line, right? Saturn lines are really exceptional when you see them on palms because they speak to typically people who have very specific spiritual roles or things that are very important for them to accomplish in this life. These are usually people that have a lot going on as it would relate to spiritual gifts. These are people that often find themselves assuming responsibility for doing very intense healing work for others, but certainly also for themselves. Okay, and And their lives can be a little tricky because of the nature of some of that. They are usually really amazing people because they're very kind, they're very compassionate, and they're really good about, again, they're the healers that we all want to see in our lives, right? But they can struggle with balancing that a lot. People who have Saturn line energy, while they're usually doing a lot of good in the world, they can have a lot of really intense internal conflict. And it can be difficult for them to be able to balance those extremes. And a lot of that, really, to be honest, comes down to with the way that our world works now. We unfortunately live in a world more and more that has very little appreciation for the spiritual. And when I say spiritual, I mean truly the spiritual. I'm not talking religion, because religion and spirituality are very different things. Okay, so we see associations here around spiritual power.
All right.
Okay, so after Saturn, and we'll see, everybody noticed, like, wait, he wasn't wearing a beanie and now he is. I know we have no continuity. Once again, another interruption. That's okay.
It's a good thing.
No. I shouldn't say interruption. We were distracted for a moment. We needed to take care of someone else. Okay, now we're back here taking care of you. So your next minor line, okay, is going to be, at least the next one that I typically focus on, is going to be called a Jupiter line, okay? Jupiter typically is going to kind of start a little bit over here closer to this area, kind of out on the outside edge of your palm, below your little finger. It's going to usually start kind of like right about here. So it sits kind of just a little bit over from Saturn, which is why people often get Saturn and Jupiter lines confused. Okay, but once you kind of get into the practice of reading palm, it's going to kind of move up, or you're going to be kind of really clear, like, oh, here it is, right? And then it kind of moves up at a diagonal up to your index finger. This is Jupiter's influence, right? Jupiter line, Jupiter finger, right? Okay. Jupiter has a lot to do, again, with things like ambition and just general senses of luck and prosperity. Not money, necessarily, right? But luck and prosperity in our lives. People who have a Jupiter line typically tend to be a bit more driven. They tend to be a bit better at handling kind of the material world around them. They just kind of, in general, just seem to be just very... They tend to be very magnanimous and generous kinds of souls, right? These are the people that are always giving. They're really cool people. They absolutely capture those Jupiterian qualities in the way that they kind of approach life and just their general personality, right? So Jupiter is always a good line to see on a palm. The third minor line that you're really going to see is going to kind of, again, sit over here to the opposite side, kind of here, kind of closer to the base of, again, your Mount of Venus, or here your thumb. And it's going to start here and move at a diagonal up, and it's going to point up to your little finger. This is Mercury. Okay? Mercury finger, Mercury line. Okay? People who have a strong Mercury line, these are our world's performers, our singers, our speakers, our people who are just very influential as it would relate to voice. These are also typically people who are very good at handling money specifically. One of the lucky things that we see, or one of the positive things about a line of Mercury on a palm, is it's usually an indication of somebody that would have greater luck, not luck necessarily, excuse me, I keep going to luck, and that's not the word I'm trying to think of. They are better able to navigate the monetary issues that come up in our life. These are usually people that just seem to kind of just stumble upon money and find situations or create situations where they're like, they always have what they need and even more, usually, as it would relate to them.
Do I have a Mercury line?
Do you have a Mercury line? Let me see.
I mean, seeing as
you do have some strong Mercury energy right here.
Oh.
Yeah. I know, because you're a singer and a performer and an excellent liar, you little Gemini, you.
I'm actually really bad at lying.
Anyway, no, I'm just giving you shit. You know that.
Oh,
it's warm in here.
Really bad.
Anyway, so those are the three minor lines. Now, you have many, many other minor lines. The challenge there is that I don't really have the ability to accurately show you those in this format because they're too tiny. Beyond that, once you get past those major lines, you are getting into a territory where everybody's hand is really going to be even more distinct. Everyone's palm is, of course, different, right? No one has the same kind of hands, right?
Even twins.
Exactly, even twins. But when you get to past major lines, you really are then kind of in uncharted water as it might relate to what you are interpreting. So do some research on your own, perhaps, if you're interested in minor lines and how they might possibly move through the palm and their significance. Beyond line activity. We also need to look at the other anatomical structure of the palm. Okay, and I've already talked about a few of these, right? I talked about this kind of this big pad right here. This is the mount of Venus, excuse me.
For those of you who are
looking
listening,
I'm looking at the mirrored image and I'm getting my mounts mixed up.
For those of you who are listening, it's the pad of the thumb, right?
Yes, the big fleshy pad at the base of your thumb.
The part that you press really, 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 really hard to help with headaches.
Sure. That is Venus. That is Venus's influence. You'll notice that in palmistry, there's a lot of planetary association. And again, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment when we talk about all the different things that go into reading palm, at least traditionally, right? But so we see the mount of Venus, right? And we see Venusian qualities here. We see, again, and this is a general indication of how well you're living life. Okay. Across from there, we have Luna, the mount of Luna, or the moon's influence in your palm. And that's the fleshy area that kind of sits at the base of your palm below your little finger, right? Okay. And this is once again where we see the moon's influences. And as a result, it's going to have, again, a lot to do with spirituality, secret aspects of our being, hidden things, right? Those things that we, that we very much acknowledge about ourselves, but we don't necessarily make public, right? A lot of that pops up here. We also see potentially, depending on the type of reading that you're doing, there could be some past life stuff popping up here too. From there, we're going to move up, and you have a mount under each finger. Okay, and I already kind of mentioned the fingers, obviously, if you've been paying attention, have some planetary correspondence as well, right? So your index finger, the kind of this rough little bump right here at the base of your finger, and the entire index finger itself, that is all Jupiter. That is Jupiter's energy. Jupiter. Okay. Your middle finger, mount at the base of that, and the finger itself, Saturn. Right. Your ring finger, right, mount at the base of that one. I thought you were flipping me off for a minute. I was gonna be like, excuse me, sir. This one, the mount, sometimes gets swallowed up because of how we use our hands anatomically. Something to do with the way that our little finger kind of curves in, and how our middle finger, the mount of Saturn, kind of takes a lot of the boom, like from what we do with our hands, right? Your mount of Apollo here can sometimes get squished. Yeah, but you do still have one there, okay? And then this finger, of course, your ring finger, this is all Apollo energy, okay? Mercury, mount of Mercury here, all Mercury, right? And so this is a kind of a cool example. Oh, and your thumb is the sun's influence, okay? And you have, not to of course, leave anybody out, right? We have Mars through this middle area right here. This is Mars's influence, right? Which is, Mars is tricky in palm reading. Not bad necessarily, but there certainly is some challenge there, right? Always challenge with Mars. Okay, but each of these have, as you can see, planetary significance, right? And it's good when you are learning to read palms to learn about your planets and your planetary alignments, because all of that information is going to give you a little bit of extra info to be able to accurately read these as they pertain to that person's life and personality and a whole lot of other stuff. A lot of other stuff about them, right? Now that's going to lead me, I'm going to move away from discussions on the anatomy of palm reading. Okay, because I want to talk a little bit about what actually goes into palm reading, okay? Because I think that there are a lot of people out there, and I'm going to refer to some of my notes here to make sure that I don't fumble my words here, okay? But there are a lot of people out there, I think now, particularly on like social media platforms, who, like to talk about palm reading, because they maybe have read a book or two, or, who knows, right? What, where they're coming from with this. So there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. Okay, but I see a lot of people now who are like, like they're 18 years of age, and they're like, I do palm readings, and I'm like, but do ya? Because to actually learn to read palm traditionally in most practices takes years. It takes a really long time to learn to read palms, particularly when you are to get to a level where you're able to really do that successfully for others. Okay, and really the reason for that is it takes not only an understanding of the anatomy and the interpretation of the lines and activity, the formations of the palm itself, but it takes a lot of other knowledge. Okay, and that's where that time comes in. Beyond that, you also have to give yourself the opportunity to look at and learn a variety of hand types. Mm-hmm. You're so quiet. You're just sitting there bored right now.
I'm just
doing
like
all the talking.
I have nothing to give to you.
Well, you need to take my next palmistry class. You'll have stuff to talk about on our next little thing here.
All right
again. So it takes a long time to learn to read the palm. Okay, and
how long did it take for you to train George?
I had to. So George, who reads palms here in the shop now. He is a student of mine, but I do want to say George had actually started or had been studying palmistry for, I think, a while prior to learning from me. George just has one of those brains. He's just a genius, and he just is always learning, absorbing and doing. And he's just, George just, I think, kind of leaves all of us in the dust as it would relate to his drive to learn and grow in those ways. But I personally, you know, I can't really, I'm not entirely sure how long George was at it before he met me, but I studied palmistry for like 8 years before I got to a point where I'm like, I feel like I know enough. I feel like I can relay this information in a way that is of benefit to the person who would be hearing it. I can do this. 8 years. Okay, and again, during that time, that wasn't really entirely all just exclusively the study of the palm, right? In reading palmistry, and again, if you're doing it traditionally, okay, you need to have knowledge not only of the anatomy, but you need to have knowledge of your planets. Okay, you need to have the ability to combine analysis, okay, knowledge of anatomy, as I mentioned a few times, the energy flow through through bodily meridians that appear in the palm, spiritual alignments and correspondences, okay, beyond planets, elements. You need to have some concept or an understanding of how past life processes work, particularly as they relate to current life process, right? Numerology. Okay, there's a lot that goes into reading palm, and you need to have knowledge, a good level of knowledge around all of these things if you're going to be able to combine all of them into palm reading. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's really kind of what you need to be able to do. You need to combine all of those things to really be able to give somebody the best information, the most complete reading. And I'm not trying to trash anybody else out there who I see online doing palm readings now, but a lot of people, you know, seem to think that you just sit down and you show someone your hand, or you let someone hold your hand and they read your palm. And people can do that. The distinction there that I find when those people have not actually studied the traditional methods of palm reading is that they're not actively reading your palm. What they're really doing is they're relying on clairvoyance and some manifestation of psychometric ability, because that's really what's going on, is they're not really reading your hand. The things that they're getting, and they could be getting good information, absolutely, but they're not really getting that information usually from these pieces of palmistry. They're getting it from what they are intuiting, right?
Yeah.
And it's not to say that the traditional methods of palmistry don't also involve intuition, because they absolutely do. You have to be able to combine all of those things, all of that knowledge and analysis, and intuition. And that's really what makes for a complete and a traditional palm reading.
And traditional.
Yes. So, and not to say, when I say traditional, I'm not trying to say that the traditional methods are best. I'm not trying to say that anything's best.
I'll say that.
But there is definitely a difference, though. If you're meeting with someone who reads palms, you want to go get a palm reading, you need to ask that person up front to make sure that you're actually getting the experience you want. Okay, not a good or a bad experience, but the experience you want, right? You need to ask them, like, what is your method? You know, which tradition or practice do you utilize? Are you reading traditionally, or are you someone that works primarily intuitively, and you use the holding of my hand perhaps in the process of a reading to be able to then pull information and read information, right? Very different thing. That person's doing psychometry. That person's working as a clairvoyant, okay? Not a palm reader, right?
So would you say that palm reading, though it incorporates aspects of intuition and psychic ability, it really does come down to like how a traditional tarot reader would just read the tarot cards, whilst in a state of openness? Yeah,
and that's fair, actually. I think that the most ideal tarot card reader, the most ideal cartomancer, is someone who is going to have a good knowledge of the traditional symbolism of their cards, right? And then beyond that, they're also going to incorporate their own intuition in the way that they're interpreting that information for the individual in the moment.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think you have to have both.
Yeah, you most definitely have to have both. And I see that, especially with tarot. I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I did not sit down and study tarot the way like Mia or you did. But I knew, I studied enough to learn like the elemental associations, all that stuff, numerological associations, but then I also do focus a lot on intuitive reading. And so I think that's also one of the reasons why I probably don't get too far into palm reading, is because I could just see myself like learning all this and then falling back on just pulling information intuitively. Because half the time when I pull cards, the cards are a buffer for me. I pull cards and they're a buffer to basically keep me focused. And even though I might pull the Queen of Wands, I am pulling information like, I'm seeing the Queen, the Queen of Wands means this, but like what I'm really feeling is it's a feminine energy that's really holding this influence, but I don't think it's female. I'm actually getting male. So I pull intuitive energy like that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sure there would be nothing wrong with doing that, but then I don't think I'd be a palm reader.
No, because again, you're in that situation, you're working purely intuitively. And again, and just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
It's just not palmistry.
I think that yeah, I mean, and and the thing is in saying that, it's not even like, who am I to tell somebody like if that's how they're working that they're not reading that person's palm? Like, like I'm not that person to say like, oh, well, you're not really a palm reader, because that's an argument that doesn't serve any purpose, right?
True.
But if you are sitting in a room and you've got someone who is a traditionally trained palm reader, and someone who is working kind of in that capacity where I just sit and hold your hand and I tell you what I see, you're gonna see two very different approaches to how that works. Okay, and both of them I think kind of deserve to be honored in their different ways.
Okay.
Right. The challenge that I guess I see with the one method where people are working just purely from like just instinct and what they're getting from like intuitively as they're holding your hand, right, is that to me seems to leave a lot of room for error as it would relate to the explanation or the relaying of information that you're seeing, right? And what I mean by that basically is like, you're holding someone's hand and you could be seeing, who knows, like I'm trying to think of it. So like you're holding their hand and you start to see like some indication of like you see a moon in the night sky, right? That visually or psychically comes into your mind. Now you will probably have your personal psychic associations of what that means, right? But without understanding the broader general associations metaphysically, and particularly in the context of palmistry as a traditional practice, you may not have the words, you may not have the knowledge of some of the other more esoteric elements of what the moon could mean, right, in relaying that information. So you could still be giving that person good information, but in that situation it's probably going to be a bit more general.
Okay.
And it may ultimately not be as applicable to what they're really kind of going through in their life right now. Like I said, it could still be good information, right? But so that's kind of where I see a problem there. I think that when we work purely intuitively, and getting back to what you said about the tarot cards, I think that for a lot of people, when they work just purely from intuition, they end up missing pieces of information because they haven't a lot of the times taken the time to really study like what we sometimes refer to here as kind of like the dictionary of symbolism, but that's okay. People are all different. People do things, in the way that they do, right? As long as they're doing good work and, giving people something that is of value, right? Who's to judge, right? All right. Talked a little bit about palmistry.
Yeah,
right?
It was really good.
Palmistry is, again, I just want to reiterate, palmistry is a really difficult thing to discuss on a platform like this or in a medium like this. If we were presenting a class or a lecture where we had the ability to be putting up like slideshows of like palms and different types of palms and things like that, which, we probably could do. But I don't know, you're better. One of the things I will say before we move on from palmistry is, as you are looking to learn palmistry, I usually do encourage you to look for teachers, and to look for like traditionally trained or traditionally practicing palmistry, palm readers or palmists. There are a lot of books out there, and there are a couple of really good books out there. Okay, there are a lot of books out there, and there are a lot of other resources to learn the basics of the palm itself and the anatomy. But a lot of that in recent years has also been like filtered through like extreme like New Age lightworker kinds of philosophies, which has completely changed a lot of the original interpretations of what those things on the palm meant, and that's difficult for me because a lot of those kinds of, when that happens, a lot of the time what that really kind of means is it becomes filtered down to something that is much more superficial or basic than it probably should be. Or sometimes people just make shit up and they're like, oh, I see this is what this is, and it's like that's that's not a real thing in palmistry. I've had that interaction with people over the years where they've been like, well, somebody told me that I have this on my palm and it means this, and I'm like, that isn't even a real thing in palmistry. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. Or they'll show me what they're talking about, and I'll be like, oh no, this is what this is. Like, this is what this is. I don't know where they came from with this, but in all the different traditions that I'm familiar with of reading the palm, I've never heard of this. This has got to be some sort of new age nonsense. Which is, again, unfortunate, because they bastardize these older practices, and I think in the process they mislead a lot of people. Anyway, so but find a teacher if you can, even if it's in an online kind of a format. Find a teacher, really vet that person to make sure that they're giving you good information. The reason that a teacher, I think, is necessary, and actually working with someone to mentor and teach you to read the palm is important, is that person, if they really are what they claim to be, they will give you the opportunity to actually work with different hands to do different types of interpretation in a live and practical kind of a way that you're just not going to get with books. Books are very difficult in the sense that you can have a complete diagram of a palm in a book, but all that's going to give you is the standard formation of the anatomy. It's not going to give you information on slight variations, or maybe this line curves this way a little bit instead, and you need to have that experience. And that's very much got to kind of do this for real kind of thing. Right, so look for teachers if you can. Okay, books are wonderful references for just the standard interpretations, but you've got to move beyond that eventually.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that would be true of any kind of divinatory.
I agree.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's switch gears a bit. Okay. Austin, what is one thing that you do in your magical practice that you haven't seen anyone else do? And what I mean by that is, like, it's not to say that no one else does it, just that you don't commonly see or have not seen anyone else doing that thing. And it could be anything.
I was thinking about this the entire time, and like I can't think of anything, because so many different traditions that I know things, but like physically seeing, like something that I haven't physically seen someone do. I haven't physically seen someone manipulate the energy of an entire room, space, or property with just using their voice.
Oh, okay.
I know there's probably other people out there who do it, but like I have a particular thing that I do utilizing the voice, where I will tune in to like there's sounds happening around us all the time.
Oh yeah.
And as a matter of fact, people who have autism or who have some sort of neurodivergency, who get overwhelmed with sounds, I think just have a tendency to tap into those more. And so for me, when I was in college and I would get overwhelmed a lot. I mean, obviously college, right? So anxiety and stress. But like there were times...
College isn't stressful.
College is stressful. So there were times where I would be in a practice room and I could just tell that there was gross, nasty energy in there. People have cried in practice rooms. People have like practice rooms are not positive.
Are they
places.
crying in there because they're just not good enough?
Yes, or there's a lot of depression. There's a lot of anxiety, and sometimes as a psychic, it was affecting me really bad because I was in practice rooms so much. And you had to sign up for a particular practice room, and you had to be there. So I was in that particular practice room, and I could just feel it. And so I actually utilized this thing that I do where I actually kind of keyed into that energy.
Okay.
And I matched its resonance, its frequency, whatever you want to call it, and I started manipulating it with my voice.
Okay.
And it was almost like, so because it was very high, it was a very high level of anxiety that I was picking up on that was just making me more anxious. I took one of my pieces that I was working on, matched it into the key that it was in.
Okay.
And then because it was very fast, I did it as fast as I could. And then as I was doing that, each time I would go and I'd repeat it, I'd get a little bit lower in pitch, a little bit slower, a little bit lower, a little bit slower, a little bit lower, a little bit slower, until I reached like a good, like, okay, it's now like calm.
Okay.
It's now like at a good level.
All right.
So I've not seen a lot of people do that. I even do that in my own, in my Reiki practice.
Yeah.
So
I hear you intone sometimes as you're working.
On occasion, I'll intone the jumons,
Yeah.
but most of the time, if I'm intoning, it's because I'm picking up on some weird resonance or frequency that I can hear psychically or sometimes physically, and I will vibrate that. And once I meet that and I create that entrapment with that sound, I will then be able to move it, process it, or transmute it.
Okay.
I actually had a voice student who wanted to learn how to do this because she's a witch. And she actually listens to the podcast, Gemma Blackthorn. She loves our podcast.
Did you say Gemma?
Gemma.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was one time we were doing this, and she's in Florida, but she was a student, and we were doing some stuff, and she was talking about how she was starting to get a migraine, and I was like, okay, well, let's find that frequency. So she found the frequency of the migraine and actually started utilizing her voice and her vibrations to break it up, bring it down, and balance it out. And by the end of about 5 minutes, she was like, it's just like a dull headache now. Yeah. It's almost like gone.
Yeah.
And so that was a really cool experience. Yeah. So it's not something I've ever seen anyone else actively do. I'm sure there are other people who do it, but I use a lot of sound when I do work. And a lot of people... attribute it to the ecstatic work that I do. And so even in full moons, we're ecstatic and we're moving and we're milling, but the tones that I'm pulling through, everything is intentional. So even if I'm clashing or I'm being dissonant, I'm purposefully doing that because there's something I'm doing and utilizing with my voice to create things. The first time I noticed this was when we were doing shocker. We were doing an Eric Whitacre piece in choir in college.
Okay.
And I noticed that with the dissonances that came with the Eric Whitacre piece, you got all these overtones. And it was like you could have 5 people singing different things, and because the overtones were so closely matched, what ended up happening was 5 people sounded like 30 people.
Okay.
And so I used that and manipulated that while I was in a really bad fibro flare during a concert to soothe my shoulders and soothe that pain. It was like I was getting I was sitting in a massage chair. It was just vibrating and helping my muscles release and relax.
Okay.
And so when I figured that out, I was like, I'm gonna play with this. And now I use it quite a bit. It's easy. I can clear a space usually pretty well with it. I can raise power with it. I think one of the most effective cleansings I've ever done is matching the frequency of a malicious energy and then being louder and more forceful than it with my voice and pushing it out or dominating it.
Okay.
Yeah, the witch's voice or the voce magicae is a real thing, and I am sad that not a lot of people use it. So there you go.
That was a lot.
How about you?
In asking you that question, it wasn't really about giving me an answer.
Oh,
this was no, you're good. No, that was an answer. You're good. No, in asking you that, really what I wanted to do in bringing this up or kind of throwing that out there is I wanted to kind of have a little bit of a conversation because I've had in recent weeks, months, I've had interactions with a few people who have found something that works for them. Like they have found this thing that they do, and in trying to research that, in trying to dig up some sort of information or confirmation of that thing, and basically in order to try invalidating their doing whatever it is they're doing, right? They've struggled to find other resources, or they have struggled to find other practitioners and other people who are doing the same thing, or who can at least validate, like, yes, I have done this, and yes, it does indeed work, right? In bringing up this conversation, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to kind of talk about this a little bit for the benefit of our listeners, because these types of spiritual practices, the things that we do, witchcraft, folk magic, the occult, these kinds of things, all of these at the end of whatever it is you've learned, at the end of whatever it is you do, at the end of whatever group or coven you might be working with or teacher you're working with, all of these things ultimately have to become or are meant to be extremely personal, which means that they can vary quite a bit from practitioner to practitioner.
Yeah.
Okay, so the point in this was basically to remind everybody that if you are doing something in your practice that no one else is doing, and that you kind of came to on your own. Like you didn't read anything about this, or no one taught you this. It's kind of just something that you intuited. Call it a process of UPG, right? Unverified personal gnosis, whatever, right? That there's nothing wrong with that. The thing to consider there, of course, when I say there's nothing wrong with it, is it giving you results?
Yeah.
Right? If you're doing it and it's working for you, you're getting measurable results for whatever the thing is, right? Then it's a good thing and you should continue to utilize it. Whether or not anyone else does it, whether or not anybody else is okay with it, right? As long as it's something that is working for you, right? It's giving you results in your practice. And I will say, just to go one step further, it's not something that is potentially going to be creating deliberately trouble for anyone else. You should do it. Excuse me. And I say that because I've had some interactions in just in recent days where people have brought up something that they do, and in the course of that interaction, they've been like embarrassed. They've been like afraid of judgment, like, oh, I do this thing, and I can tell in those interactions, like they've mentioned this at some prior point, and some other probably armchair occultist or some other asshole basically who's thinks he's the shit, has like really kind of come down on them hard for that, like, oh, well, you should never do this because or we don't do this, it's very much like that. You should always cast a circle before you do a spell. Ugh. Kind of a mindset, right? And that's unfortunate because those personalities are out there. And as I'm sitting here and I'm talking about this, I'm thinking like, I've been that person. I've done that to people over the years a few times, but usually only when it's because I can see that they're doing something that is really potentially going to harm them or someone else. I've been that, like, you probably shouldn't do this.
Or is vastly appropriate.
Yes, or is vastly appropriate. Well, again, harming someone else, right? So I think that it's been unfortunate for these people because they've had somebody do that to them. And I think that it has put them in a position of doubt around something that they're doing that actually is working for them. And so I wanted to talk about this a little bit to basically kind of remind people that if you're doing something in your practice that is giving you good results, it's working for you, and it really kind of seems to be your own thing, don't worry about it. That is kind of the essence of these spiritual practices. That is an element, I think, of the mystery that we are supposed to work with as occultists, folk magicians, witches. Okay? Don't be worried about it. Okay? For me, that's also another example of how we need to make sure, we need to be diligent and make sure that whatever it is that we ultimately use to kind of cobble together a spiritual practice, right? That we're not just basing all of that information off of exactly what we have pulled verbatim from books.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Because that's another thing I see kind of the same situation in a slightly different angle is people are like, well, it wasn't in a book. Like, I didn't read this from this author that I know is really well known, where this person is kind of seen as like they're kind of the expert on this. Yeah. And I read their book, but their book didn't say anything about this, so I'm not going to do it. Yeah. Right. And I think, and again, it comes down to, I think, issues of doubt and fear that sometimes
Well, I see that a lot with spells. Yeah. I literally had an interaction with someone where they're like, well, do you have any spell books? And I'm like, well, yeah, what kind of spell are you looking for? Yeah. And they're like, well, I don't know. I just need a spell book so that way when I start casting spells, I have spells. And I'm like, why don't you write your own spells?
Why don't you write your own?
And they're like, wait, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah. That's kind of what witches do.
Yeah. I think it's one of the reasons why over the years I've tended to kind of turn my nose up a little bit at things like ceremonial magic and like a lot of like the old grimoires that are most of them are bullshit, to be honest, but a lot of those old grimoires, because that's kind of the thinking to those particular practices, right? It's like, we always do this ritual the same way. You have to do this spell exactly as everyone else has ever done it before you, right? And I hate that thinking, because to me that runs counter to the practice of magic as a personal kind of spirituality. Right?
I think in traditions you want to follow things particularly, but things should always be just a little different. And things are always going to be different. Well, they're always going to be different, because you're going to be, if you cast this spell 3 months ago, you're still not the same person you were 3 months ago. New skin cells, new hair, your hair's gotten longer, your fingernails are longer, you might have new designs of fingernails, so things are different. But the idea that you have to do something the exact same way every single time only applies, in my personal opinion, when you're starting out, so you can get structure.
Yeah, and those are the benefits of those books, right? Yeah. Like the spell books, like going back to that, like just really quickly, right? The spell books is, I've had a number of interactions, and I think I've even mentioned this on the podcast in prior episodes, that I like the spell books that come out, like Judica Isles,
Mhm.
right? She's been prolific in putting out these like huge collections, like 1,000 spell books,
5,000.
kind of
Yeah.
whatever, right? And I, and great for her, right? But I read through a lot of those books and those spells, and I'm like, this is all bullshit,
Mhm.
But the thing is like, and in no way am I, trying to disparage her work, right? But I think the purpose of those books, when they, at least as they're written more contemporarily, is they're not meant to be like, here's your recipe, follow this exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, this is meant to be a source of inspiration.
Mhm.
Take what you need and then come up with your own shit.
Yeah.
And it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
You kind of have to do that
Yeah.
sooner or later, right? So
You should do that.
yeah.
When you're in a tradition, things will shift and things will change.
Yeah,
But certain things are done in a certain manner usually.
Yeah.
And you follow those things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
The only other thing I really had on here, I did want to talk a little bit about spell consultations.
Okay.
The process of a spell consultation, if you're working with what I would identify as an ethical and legitimate practitioner.
Mhm.
Okay. And having said that, I must qualify off the start that there are a lot of different spiritual traditions out there where you're going to find practitioners that are available to do spiritual work, spell work, whatever it might be for you. Like we do that here, right? We are witches for hire here, depending on the situation, because a lot of people bring us stuff and we're like, yeah, we're not touching that. So with that being said, what I'm about to talk about, I'm sure there are always going to be exceptions
Mhm.
to this, right? There would have to be, right? Because people are too different and spiritual practitioners are just too different. But I think there are some common ground kinds of things that people need to be aware of. And I wanted to talk about this because in recent weeks, again, here at the shop, we've had so many people contact us for spell work.
Mhm.
And when we have that conversation with them, when they contact us, I think a lot of them, at least in my interactions with them, they've been surprised. Like, they've been like, oh, I have to do that?
Yeah.
Or like, oh, this is kind of how this works?
Mhm.
And it's like, yeah, how did you think this would work?
A lot of people just want to call and pay for a spell and have it done.
Exactly. And that's never, ever a good way to work.
No.
Ever. You're never going to get what you really want from a situation like that. And any practitioner that would agree to do that, like a phone call and email from you and they're already lighting candles and doing their shit for you, that I would say, again, that is not an ethical practitioner. So talking about the process, or I would say a good and ethical and legitimate process to go through when you are consulting with someone for spell work or spiritual work in a professional level, right? In a professional capacity, one of the first things that you need to be aware of is that person, if they are ethical and they are actually what they claim to be, they're going to do a reading.
Yep.
They are going to do some sort of divinatory work, and they do that for a few reasons. One, they do that because no matter how honest you think you've been with that person in trying to get them to do spiritual work for you, you have absolutely left out details.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're embarrassed. You don't want to take responsibility for your part of that situation.
You forgot.
Right? You forgot something, right? So we do readings because then we get the full story.
Mm-hmm.
We also do readings because that gives us additional information that even you don't have.
Yeah. When you do a reading and a consultation, it's all those things, but it's also to make sure that is this just something that a conversation can be had with?
Mm-hmm.
And if there was,
that's true. People are always trying to throw magic and shit, and it's like you could just quit your job and be good,
And if the response is like, oh, well, I need to set healthier boundaries. Okay, well, I want a spell for that. Okay, how about you just
learn to say no?
Learn to say no and set healthier boundaries.
Yeah.
How about that?
Uh-huh.
But that's hard. Yeah.
So is magic.
So's life.
So is magic. Magic is also going to be hard. And I think that's one of the other things I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit when we're talking about this. Okay. One other thing that we do really quickly before we move on to that. Okay. One other reason that we do readings is when we do a reading, that also will often give us information on which of our spiritual allies and your spiritual allies are willing to help with that working.
Mm-hmm.
Information on other people that we need to be aware of and how that reading or how that working might affect them.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of all of that, how that reading will work.
Yeah.
If it will work. A lot of times you might legitimately need a spell, but it's not the spell you think you need.
Yeah.
And doing a reading is going to help us to figure out like, oh, you don't really need help with love, you need something to help you feel more self-confident, so that you put yourself out there and you make better decisions as it would relate to potential relationship partners, right?
So you don't need to curse that person. You need to actually do some deep healing work.
Exactly. And let that person go. Right. Yeah. So these are just the big reasons for why some sort of reading, a divinatory process of some sort, is going to be necessary, and that is should always be where any kind of spell work begins.
Always.
Okay. And so those of you who decide to hire someone to do spell work for you, be as honest with that practitioner as you can.
We will know if you're lying.
Because we will know if you are lying. And if we sense that you are lying, best case scenario, we will tell you, no, I'm not doing this spell for you. Worst case scenario, we will still do your spell, but we will do it in the way that it actually needs to be done, without your knowledge and permission. We're still helping you, and you asked us for help, right? But we're not going to do the spell the way that you thought it needed to be done. We're going to do it in the way that we know is going to be best for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, readings, because I've done a lot of spell consultations in the shop, and one of the things that I look for in a consultation reading is, have you already gone to other people to ask for help for this, and you've already started getting the work to started getting it done, and it's not going fast enough, or it didn't turn out the way that you wanted. So that's the thing that I always look for. I also always look for to see if there's any other magic in the situation. Have you already been manifesting this? Have you already been doing any of that? And is there another practitioner that I need to be concerned about?
That's also another good thing to discuss in this process. You know, if you're someone who's looking for magical assistance, you don't have the ability to do this for yourself, so you're hiring other practitioners to do this for you. Don't farm that same spell work out to multiple practitioners. You are going to end up in trouble with that, because even if those are all ethical and legit practitioners, they're all going to be approaching that situation from a slightly different perspective. And some of that energy is going to either conflict and create complications for you, or you're going to have a huge magical bomb go off in your life. And you might see something really good come of that particular situation, but all of that other energy has to settle somewhere. And, so you do the spell, you get the relationship you want, right? But some of the rest of that energy that was geared toward change needs to go somewhere, right? So you get your new relationship and you're happy, but you lose your job. Something else horrible will happen, because there still is room that you have made in your life for change. Okay, so you need to be mindful of these things. These are the things you need to be aware of, and why when you come to us, we're like, let's do a reading on this before we agree to do any other kind of work.
And you should always have some sort of homework to do after a consultation.
Let's talk about that.
I always give my clients, there's something they have to do on their end. Now, if that is, I need you to hike up into the mountains and bring me this particular dirt from this particular place, that's what you're going to do.
If you want that spell done.
If you want that spell done, that's what I need, and that's your homework. That shows me that you're invested.
That process is also serves another purpose, though, because not only are they then enabling or helping you with the work that is going to ultimately be benefiting them, but that also, in the process of doing that, it gives them a time, I think, to really consider, like, how much does this really mean? And now that I know I have to also do some work toward this, is it really worth it? Do I really want this? Or am I going to maybe find a way to handle this on my own, or in more mundane ways?
Prime example. I had a client who came in. I did a reading. This was my first reader shift here in the shop. When I started
when you were just a psychic baby?
No, this was like when I started back.
Okay, so just recently.
Just recently.
Okay. Gotcha.
First shift here. She comes in, she sits down. I pull cards, and I'm like, you need to do these things. This is what you need to do, and I don't actually need to have a hand in this. Here's a fucking candle. And she did none of it. She didn't follow the instructions. No, she wanted me to do it. And I was like, okay. Nope. You have to do this. Well, a couple weeks ago, she came and she got another reading. Same shit's going on. She didn't follow my instructions. Still hadn't burned the candle. So I went, are you going to take it seriously now? And lo and behold, she did. I got everything handled, taken care of, blended, put together. She brought me the things I needed. I handled it. And so far, I've not heard anything bad.
Okay.
So, because she went, wow, it's actual work. And it's, yes, Yes, it is.
It is work.
It's work for me, and it's work for you.
You doing those things also helps us as the witch who really, we want that situation to be successful for you. If we are ethical practitioners, we want whatever we're doing for you, we want that to work for you. We want your life to be improved in some way. Okay, we do. We have to care. Otherwise, any magic or any energy we direct at that is not going to manifest any fucking thing. We have to care about you, at least for the duration of that transaction, right? We have to care. Okay, and because of that, if you are agreeing and you follow and you do those things and you do your work, you do your homework, you take care of your piece, that also helps us to feel a little bit better about the investment we're making in you emotionally, right? Beyond that, that work is ultimately what is going to happen for you to really connect to the energy work. And this is another reason I think that people get taken advantage of by, like, you know, you see these people online, like these charlatans that like message people out of the blue, like, oh, I'll do this spell for you and make you rich, right? And shit like that. You know, the reason that practitioners like us, when we see those things and we know that that's bullshit, one of the reasons we know that that's bullshit, right, is because anybody who does spell work for you is going to have some interaction. They're going to have to either give you an item, or there's something that needs to be done on your end that will anchor their energy and their work in your life.
Yep.
Otherwise, we've just sent energy out toward you, and it's just kind of hovering around, right? You have to make room in your life, and you have to give us something to anchor that to in your life, which is another reason why you need to do some work. Okay, and people don't seem to understand that, right? But how are you really going to be able to claim the effect of that spell if you haven't personally put any energy or effort toward it?
Yep.
Right? It's really simple when you think about it, but I guess people don't want to think about it, right?
No, people want magic because magic is the magic answer.
They think.
When they find out the work that is to be done and all the stuff that has to go into it, it's a lot more. I mean, it's the same thing with practitioners who work with spirits like the Goetia, and there's people who want them to work with the Goetia for them. It's like, okay, well, whatever, that's fine. But these people don't necessarily understand that those spirits will get their pay. And if that practitioner or you aren't holding up your end of the bargain the way that they think you should be, it's going to fuck shit up.
Yep.
I mean, the work that I've done for a lot of my clients, I had a client who I did some work for, and she was like, I don't know what you did, but it worked really awesome. Who do I need to give offerings to?
Oh, so that's good. That was a good client, I think.
And
that's funny too, actually, as I say that, because I think that people think sometimes that when they work with us as professionals, they think that, like, in that exchange, the way that works, that transaction works, that like that they're the ones that are kind of measuring or assessing us. And I think people don't realize that we do the same to them. But like, you come in and see us for a reading, if you don't do what we ask you to, or you're not as cooperative with that working as we need you to do, we assess and judge you too. You know, and what that basically means is that the next time you come in and ask us to do a spell for you, we're probably going to be like, no, we're not available.
I had a client who I worked everything up for, and I had everything, and it was in the shop for 2 weeks.
I'm looking at 2 things that George did for someone here. If you're watching this, Manuela, if you're watching this, you got a honey jar in here. You need to come pick this shit up, because until you do, this spell is never going to work for you. Okay, I don't know if
Manuela actually watches the podcast.
Well, I don't know if she watches the podcast or not, and I don't really give a shit, to be honest. I'm tired of looking at her honey jar. She needs to come pick it up, because until you do, this spell is not complete. So remember that, those of you who are watching and listening to this, okay, if we do a working and we tell you, like, okay, I need you to take this, I need to give this to you, you better fucking come and pick that item up.
Yeah, you better
come get that from us, because until you do, that spell is not complete.
Yeah, it better be a priority.
And if that sits on our altar or sits somewhere in our house or in our business, whatever, for a few weeks, and we have not heard from you, we have not seen you come in to pick it up, we're going to throw it away.
Yeah.
We're going to dispose of it in some aspect. And when that happens, spell done. Spell done. No effect. You're not going to get what you wanted. Okay? And we've had that happen too. We've had, I think, a couple of people over the years who have asked us to do something. We've done something for them. We've told them, like, you need to come and pick this up. Right? And like months have passed. And, you know, and one of them, I remember we did something for her, and she actually showed up like 3 months later and was like, I'm here. Oh, well, I am here. Can I grab the thing? And we're like, honey, we disposed of that thing weeks ago, because we have not seen anything of you. We have not heard from you.
Yeah.
And you were told you needed to come in and pick this up now, and you didn't. And she's like, oh, well, can you do it again? Like, no, I'm not going to do that for you again. Why would I do that? Right? And if I did agree to do that, you're going to pay me for it again.
Yeah.
Because that's a brand new spell at that point.
Yep.
Right? So remember that shit. Go pick up your stuff. If we prepare talismans and things for you, go pick them up. Right? Don't clutter up our houses. That's just going to piss us off. Right? And tell us that you don't really value the work that we've done for you. And what we do for you is potentially life-changing. Pay attention. Right? Anyway. That's all I got. Exactly.
But other than that, I hope everyone's doing well. I'm glad that I was back and able to do a podcast episode.
Yeah, it's nice for you to like show up and be a team player for once. Usually you're like, it's kind of like all about you and what you want to do in the Austin show, and I'm just kind of here to carry the burden and the responsibility. So it's been nice to have you back.
Happy witching!
Thank you, everybody.